how do I get this to work? There we go. A little bit about me. I like to help companies scale. So up until recently, I led the product team at Eventbrite. I used to lead user growth at Pinterest and Grubhub, and I've advised a lot of companies on how to scale, their products and businesses such as Canva, Fair, whatnot, et cetera. And I want to start today by talking about this concept of the product lifecycle, which Scott Belsky, the Chief Product Officer at Adobe, popularized. And it's really simple. Users flock to a simple product. That product takes users for granted and adds features to satisfy power users, which makes users flock to simple product. And I want to dig into this a little bit more to explain why this happens. So when users flock to a simple product, we as PMs, product designers, we talk to those users. We understand what they like. We understand their problems. They may even look like us. So we feel like we have a good intuition on what problems they need solving or what features they want built. And we start to build more for those types of users. And by building more for those types of users, we're actually making it more valuable for those existing customers who have already figured out how to get value out of this product, which means we might be seeing more engagement. We might be making more money, all these great things, right? Let's rejoice. But what happens on the flip side when you're adding more value for existing customers is you're making it harder for new customers to understand that initial value you might have built earlier. So your activation rates go down. Your acquisition of new users might decrease. And you might be able to rationalize this, being like, oh, we're just not bringing in the right types of users, but clearly we have, these types of users that are getting a ton of value. Let's just double down on them. And then you make the cycle even worse, and you end up with a product that has no growth and is too hard for most people to use. And, when Scott wrote about this, he's not just some Substack thinkfluencer, right? He's living it in that, one of the key products that he runs at, Adobe is Photoshop. And, Photoshop's an increasingly complex product, and startups like Canva and Figma have disrupted a lot of the use cases of this product by having something much simpler that it's easier for users to adopt. So what's the solution to the product lifecycle? Well, the easy answer is just don't listen to your users. You should be ignoring your power users, and you should be trying to figure out what your potential users need, your non-users need. And at this point, you're probably being like, what the hell is going on? I'm at a product talk and this guy's telling me not to listen to users. This flies in the face of everything I've heard about my job, right? So this is obviously not the real answer. If it were a Substack post, it would probably stop there. The real answer is that you need to segment your users, and you need to protect new users from existing user needs. The most common way that companies do this, which we'll talk more about, is that you have something like a growth team that focuses on the new users and how to acquire them and how to make sure they get set up for success, separate from maybe a core product team that is building, new advancements to drive additional engagement for existing users that are already successful. And we're going to talk about a bunch of examples of that from my experience at Pinterest. But the other thing you want to do is identify a product complexity strategy that you're using to manage increasing complexity over time. And we're going to cover these two topics somewhat out of order, which I hope is going to be okay. And we're going to start with some of the examples of trying to segment new users effectively. So at Pinterest, we face this problem, right? We want to focus on the new user experience. Our activation rates are going down. So what do? Well, we create a dedicated team, which we call the activation team. You might call it a user experience team or an onboarding team. And we basically gave them control of the entire new user experience. And we focused on aligning on what's the right key metric for this activation team to move, and gave them the freedom to experiment on that entire user experience to see what could move, activation for a product like Pinterest. So when you're thinking about an activation team and trying to, have a focused metric, right? What is really the metric you care about for new users? Something like traffic, I think we all could say is not very good. Downloads also pretty ho-hum, right? Signups is not even feeling really great, right? Because they're not necessarily getting the core value of the product. So a lot of teams will be like, oh, it's about getting them to that first transaction or that first engagement if you're not a transactional product. That's getting a little bit warmer. And some teams might be like, no, it's about getting them to a second transaction or engagement. That shows they've really figured it out and they enjoyed the first time. And again, that's warmer too, but still not quite right. So the way I like to think about it is that there's a key action in your product that indicates the user had a valuable experience. And there's a designated frequency with which the user should want to receive that core product value that you've created. And if you can identify these two things, you can get close to identifying the right metric for a team like an activation team. So let's take a look at how we did this for Pinterest. For Grubhub, answering this question is super easy. There's only one thing you can do that indicates you receive value using the product, and that's ordering food. But for Pinterest, there's lots of different things you could do in the product that potentially indicate you're receiving value. You could click on a piece of content to go to where it came from to learn more about it or to buy it. You could scroll through a lot of images, or you could save an image we recommended so you can get back to it later. And we really had to dig into these different activities to find out which one was the best indicator of the user receiving value. So clicks had clickbait issues where people thought they were getting something valuable. When they went to the website, it wasn't actually that valuable. Scrolling indicated the user had a lot of intent, but maybe we weren't satisfying it that well. Whereas a save indicated we showed you something and you liked it enough that you wanted to get back to it later. So save became the key action we optimized for. And on designated frequency, the way I like to think about this problem is if you're not sure if this should be a daily product, a weekly product, a monthly product, what's the way people tried to solve this before your product existed, which we call the offline analog? So the way that people connected to more content on their interests before Pinterest was they got magazine subscriptions, and those came on either weekly or monthly subscriptions. So we started with monthly, and then we later changed it to weekly because it turns out for a growth leader like me, it's really easy to send an email or push notification that gets people to come back once a month. And we didn't think that was actually the right level of engagement, that we should be reaching for. So you have your key action, you have your designated frequency. That's all you need for this activation metric that you should goal the team on, right? Well, not exactly, but it's getting you closer. Now what we can do is a cohort analysis where on the y-axis, we could take the number of new users in a month, let's say the month of January, and we could see how many of them did that key action. In the case of Pinterest, saving something, or in the case of Grubhub, ordering food. And then on the x-axis, we can plot on the designated frequency in the future, how many of those users continue to perform the key action. And for most products that we're talking about, you're going to see a lot of people drop off, like in this graph. Like a lot of people are going to churn for most products. What's more important is that this graph flattens out. And over time, you eventually stop losing users out of this cohort of new users. And these users are predictably, finding the key action on the designated frequency. At Reforge, we call this getting users to the habit moment, which is when they know they're going to use this product and they have a habit of using it on a regular frequency. So right at the point where you stop continually losing users at the cohort, where this beautifully designed orange arrow is, we call that the habit metric. So really, the goal of a team is to get the key action at the designated frequency when you can reliably predict if they're doing it this week or this month or whatever, that they're going to keep doing it in the future. This is the activation metric we focused on. So if you get this activation metric, which we call the habit metric, and in the case of Pinterest, it was people saving in the 4th week. It took 4 weeks to stop losing people, out of the cohort. Then you can work backward to how do I get more people to the habit moment, to get people to that habit metric. And basically what you want to take is that key action. How do you get people to that key action for the first time? We call that the aha metric. It's the aha moment, the first time users are receiving the value of the product. And then you need to work backward from the aha metric to what work both the user and the product need to do to reliably get someone to experience that aha moment. We call this the setup moment measured by the setup metric. So for Pinterest, as we kept optimizing this, we figured out that, if saving in the 4th week is the habit metric, the aha metric is going to be that save in the first session, getting people to save one piece of content. And then in order to get people to reliably find something interesting enough to save, we need to get them to pick the topics that they care about. We need them to pick 5 different ones. And now we have all of the key metrics we're optimizing for Pinterest to ultimately get more people to the habit of using Pinterest, over time. Okay, so we got our metric. We know what we're optimizing for. Now, what do we actually do to get more people, to build a habit, of using Pinterest? Well, this is the page that we would drop new users into when we started working on this project. First, what you'll probably notice is it's the web, not the app, and that there's a bunch of different things going on. There isn't a lot of direction on what you're supposed to do. So first, what we focused on is just trying to reduce complexity in the product that didn't align to getting people to save a first piece of content. So first off, don't worry about inviting friends if they aren't connected to good content yet. Topics are a better indicator of what content you care about than friends anyway. We shouldn't try to get them to connect to existing friends either. We shouldn't be trying to tell people where content comes from if we haven't explained boards yet, which in this case we hadn't. We also shouldn't be showing descriptions of the content that users write, because the more imagery we can show on a page, the more likely people are going to find something they care about. And last but not least, Rose Byrne's cute and all, but that image is not Rose Byrne. So we have some problems with our attribution and the quality of these descriptions, the quality of these titles. We should be removing that stuff if we're not confident that it's really accurate. So the next thing we focused on is how do we get people to get on the app, which had a much higher activation rate, getting much higher people to save in the 4th week. So we tried every trick in the book to try to get people from mobile web to the app. We started with the Apple prompt. Turns out this is the worst performing prompt we ever tested. And then we kept iterating. So we ended up, blurring what the experience was like in the background, moving the call to action to the bottom, and showing what the content would look like as an animated GIF. And then we moved to making it a header so that if you weren't ready to download the app yet, you could experience what it was like. And then when you click on content, we'll push you to the app. And then this is more the optimized version we eventually got to after dozens of experiments in driving higher and higher conversion rates to getting people to the app. Then when you got to the app, you had this blurred background image of what the product was like, and then we asked you for a bunch of information up front. So we tested, can we move this to multiple steps to increase conversion rate? It did increase conversion rate. And then we said, hey, we can pre-populate some of this stuff. We can put in a progress bar. We can make the calls to action a little bit lighter, continue instead of sign up. It turns out it gets more people to the next page. So really trying to reduce friction that's preventing people from getting to the product value. And then we said, hey, we can pre-populate a lot of this stuff. We don't need to make a lot of this stuff required. So we ended up grinding down the user experience of sign up to a pre-populated email or connecting with Facebook and Google, and then optionally adding your age and gender, and then getting right into the place where we really stopped you, which is the topic picker. So in trying to get to a great activation rate, one of the principles we came up with is you want to get to the aha moment as fast as possible, but not faster. And if we didn't ask people for topics, then we're just going to show people popular pins, which are less likely to resonate with what they're interested in. So we stop people, we make them pick the topic picker, but everything that isn't optimizing towards getting you better content, we try to reduce as much friction as possible. And then when you actually got into the content, we did all the things we talked about on web on the app. We got rid of the descriptions. We got rid of the attribution of where the images came from, and really just tried to focus getting as much content on the page as possible that you might be interested in. But we weren't afraid to educate contextually. So when you landed on the page and stopped, we'd ask you to scroll to see more. When you stop on an image, we'd ask you to tap it to get a closer look. And then we'd have a pulsar over the save button when you landed on the close-up of the image to teach you how to save content using this product. And what happened by doing all of this work is we doubled the activation rate from sign up to a retained user, someone that was continually saving every week in a 1.5 years of optimization work. So really big impact for the business. So at this point, I'm thinking, I got all this new user experience stuff figured out, right? I'm ready to take this weapon and use it in a bunch of other different products and companies. But how much time a product has to get people to the aha moment is very different from company to company. So for Pinterest, which is a consumer product and a product that's kind of hard to explain, you kind of just need to get people into the product experience as soon as possible. So you're trying to reduce all this friction, you put in a little bit of friction so that you can show them a good experience, but otherwise reduce as much as possible. Whereas for Eventbrite, we're dealing with event creators who are running businesses. And they are small businesses, but they are very clear on why they're signing up. They know what product value they are trying to get, and they are willing to put in a lot more work to figure out if the product is going to work for them. So yeah, you don't want to make the user experience hard. You don't have to obsess over shaving seconds off of the user experience like we did at Pinterest. That work is going to be a lot less valuable. And if you're a super enterprise product, like say a Snowflake, the customer might be willing to spend months of time of investment before they actually see the core product value, and is willing to do that upfront investment because they know they're already really sold on how much value there could be if they get all this setup work right. So there's very different timeframes, which means very different tactics you might choose to optimize the user experience for different types of products. Another thing that's different between my experience at Pinterest and Eventbrite is just the complexity of the product in general and how old the product was. Pinterest was 3 years old when I joined the product. It didn't have a decade's worth of people, adding cruft and adding new features all over the place and accumulating tech debt. There were really only a dozen or so features Pinterest even had. Whereas Eventbrite was 14 years old when I joined. It had over 100 features. It had lots of tech debt in different places. And that means you're going to need different potential solutions to reduce complexity over time. Pinterest is largely about preventing complexity from accumulating. Eventbrite, it's like, no, that complexity is already there. How do we dramatically reduce it and make it easier for the customer in the process? So this led me to explore what are the different options I had to deal with the complexity of the product, at Eventbrite. And there are 5 approaches we're going to talk about and where they work and where they don't work. So the first approach is a lot of the work we did at Pinterest, which in design community we call progressive disclosure. In the framework I'm talking about, we'll call it temporary simplicity. And the idea behind progressive disclosure is that you only introduce the basic functionality of a product to keep the user experience really simple. And once that core functionality is well understood, it's being leveraged properly by the user, you can start to layer in some more complex things. So one of the things that wasn't there in the user experience for Pinterest is shared boards. We can introduce that later. Or the like button, we can introduce that later. We really kept it focused on saving stuff to boards, right? That's the only thing you want to learn, and how to use the feed. But we can add these more complex features down the line once we know you've got it. The downside of progressive disclosure is that it really only delays complexity in the product rather than eliminating it entirely. And if there's more variability in what the key value props are in the product, it may just not be a good solution overall. So for Eventbrite, which has so many different features, and there's so many different types of customers trying to get different types of value out of it, if we try to progressively disclose, we may be hiding the key selling point certain customers are thinking about when they're trying the product, which could lead to worse activation rates. The second approach is validating product market fit of additional products and then unbundling them from the experience, or what in this framework we call temporary complexity. So this is something that Facebook Messenger did quite well and Uber Eats did quite well. The idea behind it is you have a product that has product market fit, you layer in a new product experience on top of it, and once you confirm that that new product or feature has product market fit, you can spin it out into a separate website, a separate app, and therefore that core experience, in this case the Facebook app or the Uber app, is no longer as complex as it was because all this additional functionality is now somewhere else. The downside of using an approach like this is when you're layering an additional feature on product on top of a core product that works really well, that core product is handling user acquisition for you. And when you then move this new product that's found product market fit somewhere else, it now needs to find a different way to acquire customers, which is why when you open the Uber app today, there's still a lot of promotion for Uber Eats, even though it's a separate app. And why Facebook Messenger is now coming back into the core app. And one of the reasons they moved it out is that the Facebook app was getting too large for third world countries and too complicated. But now that chat has become much more strategic for other reasons, file sizes aren't as important on mobile, they're actually starting to bring that functionality back. So it's hard for this to work really well. And there have been many examples where the unbundling leads to no growth of the app post unbundling. All right, third approach is just training the user, or what we think about as hacking complexity. And you see this a lot in bottom-up SaaS products with training in the UI, or just with educating customers manually with humans. So there's a famous saying in the design community that a design with education is considered a bad design. And when I first, heard that quote, I thought to myself, has that person ever tried to design event management software? Because this shit's pretty hard. So my rebuttal to that is that a design that educates is better than a design with no education. Sure, we all strive for the perfectly amazing user experience, but a lot of times it's just too hard to get there. And if so, I'd rather introduce, some directions on how to use this thing properly and get value. And for more complex products and higher lifetime value products, you could just use humans to fill in for areas where that self-serve experience isn't possible yet or ever. The downside of trying to leverage training a lot is that if you're introducing people in the process, they are very expensive. That's not something that's going to work for a consumer product, like a Pinterest. Even creating, videos or templates can be super time consuming or cost prohibitive for many types of businesses. And, UX-based education, if you're trying to do this all in a more scalable way, it can easily create banner blindness the way we try to ignore ads on the internet. I'm sure many of you have downloaded apps that have had like 5 to 10 screens at the beginning that try to explain how to use the product. Does anyone ever actually read those? I certainly don't. I skip past all of them. Okay, the fourth one is one that the MBAs love, and that's segmenting user experiences, or what I call in this framework, optional complexity. You see this a lot in companies that are B2B and they have more enterprise clients and more SMB clients. So the idea behind it is that you can segment users into different products that are the right level of complexity for their sophistication, right? Enterprise might need all these security features. It might need really advanced things, whereas the SMB might need something much simpler to do their accounting or whatever. And then in those higher packages, you charge a lot more for them, which might allow you to go back to the previous example and pair them with training, with one-to-one account managers, all those things that might not be affordable, based on the package price for like a small business. And the challenge with this, especially in modern times, is it's really hard to segment super cleanly. Something might look good on a strategy doc, but when it flows into the actual users, it's just not as obvious that one person fits into the simple bucket and one person fits into the complex bucket. And also people can migrate from being in the simple bucket to the complex bucket. We see this with Eventbrite all the time. Their businesses get more sophisticated over time, and then they need more and more product from us that they didn't when they signed up. So I find that this one's, when it works, a lot of time it's used as more of a pricing segmentation tool than a product complexity segmentation tool, where students or seniors or nonprofits are getting a special rate, but they're not really getting that much different of a product. So it's not really addressing the complexity situation that well. And last but not least, and certainly the hardest, is you're trying to keep the core product simple, but make advanced features discoverable only when they're needed, or what we call perceived simplicity in this framework. And the idea behind this, and WhatsApp's a really great example of this, is you have a product that really revolves around one or two core features. In the case of WhatsApp, obviously, that's chat. And you really want everything else besides chat to feel invisible until there's a user need. And then when there's a user need, it should sort of feel obvious how to go get that. So if you look at the screen to the right of WhatsApp, 90+% of the real estate is focused on chat. But if you need to actually call this person, I bet it will take you less than a second in this screenshot to figure out how to call a person. If you need to record a voicemail for that person, I bet it will take you less than a second. If you need to attach a screenshot, again, I bet it will take you less than a second to figure it out. Now, this is incredibly hard to pull off from a user experience perspective. And if you're not a product that has an insanely important core feature, you might not be able to do this at all, or you might be capped on the overall complexity that you can provide in a product if you're really trying to be focused on doing one thing really well. But from Eventbrite's perspective, this was definitely the strategy that we felt we mostly had to pursue in terms of trying to address complexity for us. We need to make it really simple for people around the world to create an event listing and share that and market it. And yeah, some of those people are going to need advanced email marketing tools. Some of those people are going to need to optimize Facebook ads. Some of those people are going to have advanced accounting needs. And we want to make it pretty obvious when they're looking for that, where it is, how to get started, but don't distract the 90% of people who aren't going to need that and just need to create a simple event listing, which is, the majority of our event creators. And we're still working on making this successful. In some places it's going well, and in some cases we got a lot of work to do. Okay, so if you're like, look, Casey, I'm just not one of these framework guys. Like I need something more tactical on what to do for my particular situation. I got you. Here's the cheat sheet slide. Based on the amount of money you make for the average customer in your product, there's probably a most appropriate way that you're going to design the new user experience around that. So if you're making a ton of money per customer, tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars, there is no reason you're not just going to insert people in the process to make sure those users get set up for success. This is the Snowflake example, but this is also pretty much every high revenue enterprise product. You're going to have a solutions engineer. You're going to have a dedicated account manager, whatever it takes to get you up and running successfully. There's too much money at stake to risk having the customer try to figure it out on their own. And then if you're a little bit down market B2B customer, like say an Airtable or a Canva, you might be investing in different things that show people how to use the product successfully, so they're not stuck in a blank canvas. That could be, videos, webinars, or it could just be an investment in a ton of templates. These could be generated by the company, or these could be user-generated templates. And that could help people, really figure out how to use the product successfully. And then if you have a wide base of some customers you make no money from and some customers you make thousands of dollars from, then segmentation is going to make a lot of sense here, where, for the people you're not making any money from, you might adopt approaches further down this line, like simplification or intuitive UX. And then for people that are making you a lot of money, you might talk to them directly or have great webinars or, have a bunch of extra tools that help them be successful. And then when you really get into consumer land with much lower revenue per customer, you're either in progressively disclosing, dramatically trying to simplify the new user experience, reintroduce the complexity later once people get it, or you're just trying to have that intuitive UX revolving around like one core single thing, but the ability to have people learn how to use additional features when they need them, which may not be that often. So hopefully this is a framework that can help you align where your company is on this graph, and then figure out what you might want to try first to see if you can improve the new user experience and reduce overall complexity in the product. So in summary, we want to fight the product lifecycle. This is our job as product managers and product designers. Let's not just let the product get too complex for new users to be successful in. The best way to start fighting the product lifecycle is with the new user experience. Identify that habit metric, which is the key action at the designated frequency until you can predict they're going to do it inevitably in the future. To get people to that habit metric, we want to try to get people to the aha moment as fast as possible, but not faster, by either decreasing friction, increasing intent, not being afraid to use education where it makes sense, and removing elements that distract from the core value prop. And then when we're getting to the overall complexity strategy, have a complexity strategy that you're leveraging or a multiple of them. And there are 5 that we talked about: progressively disclosing, validated and unbundling, training, segmenting, or making advanced features discoverable only when they're needed. And your business model is likely going to impact which one or ones of these approaches that you can even attack. So being really thoughtful about this can really help you make a product still feel usable as you're adding more and more stuff and adding more and more different types of users. So that's all I had for today. We're just scratching the surface of all the work we do at Reforge on optimizing for retention, engagement, and product strategy. So if you're looking for more stuff like this, I urge you to check out Reforge and sign up for some of the cohorts. But with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much for that talk. That was really insightful and helped unbundle a lot of things when it comes to thinking about product complexity across time, as well as across different companies and how they should be thinking about this. There are a few questions that we have for you today. So I think the first one was starting with the cheat sheet. You sort of have a plot of the various companies and the revenue that they make from their customers. What are some counter examples where you see that the product complexity is, doesn't fit that scale, or they seem like outliers on that axis?
Yeah, great question. Probably the right question to ask. So I think especially during the time period where they were a high growth company, Dropbox felt like a real outlier. It felt like it had B2B economics, but with a consumer-like user experience. And most people were able to never talk to a human, but would end up paying hundreds or get their company on board and pay thousands of dollars. And I think Dropbox actually maybe took some wrong lessons from that, in that it was like so successful as a what we call bazoomery product, right? Where it was a consumer-like experience that business users use a lot. But a lot of the new products they launched were actually consumer products. A photo collection app, an inbox, and that didn't really drive success for them. And I feel like it prevented them from doing what was perhaps the obvious next step to me, which is like, sell this to bigger and bigger companies, and yeah, introduce a sales team, and do what now we think of as a more common we call it like PLG strategy, which is sure, let people start using the product, let it proliferate inside a company, then call up that company's chief information security officer and say, hey, there's already 100 people using this product. Do you want to sign up for the enterprise plan and lock you into 3 years? Now they of course do that, but I felt like they waited a bit long to move up that line graph because they were so successful at having a really optimal user experience, very high activation rates, very high referral rates to acquire new users. But that was one that definitely jumped out at being kind of way off the chart you would normally think about. And I'm trying to think if there are any others that stood out like that in more recent experience. I think I've been really surprised with the ability of a lot of the kind of 2.0 note-taking wiki level apps in their ability to activate users of all different shapes and sizes, students, enterprises, et cetera. So these are the companies like Notion and Coda. And I think templates prior to this generation felt like a bit of a half measure, in that like, oh, okay, like I'm staring at something blank screen. I can then go look at a bunch of templates. None of them really fit exactly what I'm trying to do, but maybe they give me enough of an indication of where I'm going that I can, figure out how to move forward. And I think, Coda as a recent example, it's like, for people like us, product managers and product designers, it's like, here's the PRD, we use the Figma. Here is, the prioritization process we use at Pinterest, like all of this kind of stuff. And it's just like, you could take that thing off the shelf and use it, and functions as a great way to learn that, new, very powerful B2B product with a level of training wheels that actually gets you to some real product value instead of like just learning how to play with it. So I think those are some more recent examples that have felt like really great from like an end user perspective as well.
Awesome. Thank you for those examples. In terms of like, oftentimes we see companies launching newer products. There's a whole buzz around like generative AI, for example, and
Yep.
talk about like Notion. I know that they launched something based on generative AI recently.
Yep.
A lot of these are, newer capabilities, and they often get launched with the goal of like acquiring new users or like trying to accelerate growth engines. At what point do you think that, hiding these capabilities or like having progressive disclosure, for example, can sort of like, stop leading to new user growth? And how do you balance or manage the trade-off there?
Yeah, great question. So, one of the things we teach in the product strategy program at Reforge is when you're thinking about new product expansion, which we all eventually need to do to grow our products, like network effects, even the strongest ones don't last forever. Then there's different, ways of doing that. One is trying to sell a second product to your existing customer. I'd say that's the most common, right? And then there's trying to sell the same product to a radically different type of customer. It could be enterprise, or it could be in a totally new country. We probably think of that one as the easiest, but it depends on who that new country or user is. And then there's things where it's like, okay, I'm selling to a totally new customer and I'm selling a totally new product. Amazon Web Services is an example of this, right? Where it's like they're selling to developers for the first time, and they're not selling how to buy books, right? They're selling, a very, very different type of value prop. Obviously, a lot harder to make those successful. And generally, you're really leaning on a core competency that just happens to enable a new business to be built. Square Cash is another like a recent example of that, right? Generally using a new product to introduce new users to your existing product plus that product, it's not usually the best acquisition tool. sure, it might get you on TechCrunch or get you some buzz, but like that's going to be more attractive at getting like other engineers or PMs interested in joining your company than it is as like a scalable user acquisition channel. So I don't really recommend that. I think the counterexample to that, which is definitely not the I added AI into my product, but things that make products more multiplayer, right? Those are the things that really enable like acquisition as new features or products. And I think with most of these recent examples of multiplayer products, they've been baking multiplayer into the core of the first product they build. When you try to enable it into the second product you build, it's generally a lot harder. Like Evernote, for example, was a lot less social, and they tried to layer in social, and it just didn't feel right because all of us were used to using this as a personal note-taking tool at that point in time. So it wasn't the driver of new user acquisition I think they had hoped. So generally, I'd say when you're launching a new feature or product, you're trying to either improve acquisition, retention, or monetization, for your core experience. And unless the product is something that's making it more easy to use with coworkers, with friends, significant others, et cetera, like acquisition is going to be the harder one to really hit your goals on with new features and product. In general, if you're building a totally new product, the reason you want to build it inside your current company is that it's way easier to find users who will try it because you've got a core business that you can cross-sell it to, right? And that's part of the Uber Eats success, et cetera. So that's definitely something I'd be more interested in. So I think, yeah, like these products, integrating, OpenAI or whatever, you might get a little bit of buzz. That buzz might help with investors. It might help with employees. It's probably not going to help with new user growth. And it may help with activation rates. Something that was a little bit too manual and hard now becomes a lot easier, things like that. Or it may help with long-term retention and engagement of existing users, things like that. And I think that's more where you'll see if these features even find feature product fit inside these products like Notion or Canva or Bing that have integrated them. That's probably where it's going to go. Okay, to counter my point there, I think Bing is a good example where this did become a little bit of a user acquisition vehicle. They're so far behind, they came out with this radically different thing. And, it turns out the chatbot's crazy and all this kind of stuff, but all press is good press for a search engine that has less than 5% market share, right? So in that case, $1 trillion company has the ability to fuel a hype cycle, things like that. It can work, but that is definitely 1 out of 100 cases.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. You spoke a lot about like metrics and habit metrics, and then, finding your aha moments. Like, what is the playbook for, being able to figure out these metrics, and how do you go about like doing that for various products? Like, do you also validate correlations, causality? Like, what are the things that you're looking at in being able to identify these? I think you gave an example of how you did that at Pinterest.
Yeah.
I think it would be great for the audience to understand how you can generalize that across various products.
Yeah, so we teach a whole program at this at Reforge, so I'll try to do very much the short version. But when you have a product that has product market fit, meaning you've got retained users, you've been able to grow the number of them, they give you a lot of information implicitly on why they stuck around, based on the different things they actually do in the product, whether it's the categories they engage with or the features they engage with, all these different things. So your first step, if you're dropped in as like, a new PM trying to figure out how to improve activation or retention or something, is you're looking at all those things and you're seeing which ones, correlate to long-term success. And you're going to get a lot of stupid stuff in there, right? Like when we first did this analysis of Pinterest, it's like, it turns out users who save 100 pins in the first session are 10x likely to retain. And it's like, well, duh, that tells us the user is crazy. It doesn't tell us anything about, the number of saves in the first session that really matter. And then some, you're like, I can't tell if this is causal or correlative. So in the Pinterest example, people who search in the first session had like 5x higher activation rate. So we did a whole experiment where we tried to get people to search when they signed up. Dramatic failure, because if people had search intent, it worked great. But if you put a search bar in front of them and they don't know what to search for, it's just a dead end. So you're going to have those failures in trying to optimize for retention, where you're like, I'm not sure if it's causal or correlative. Let's go run an experiment. Okay, that experiment failed. Okay, throw that idea. And then, some of the next things we tried to do, did work. So you're trying to get a shortened list of the things that potentially are causal. And then you start running experiments to see if you make that more prominent, if you put that more in people's face, do you get that causal impact you're looking for, downstream? And not all of them are going to work. Just in every example, like we had failures before we had successes.
Awesome. And I see a live question here from the Q&A. The question touches on how do you identify habit metrics for low frequency, high value e-commerce businesses?
Low frequency and high value. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So this is definitely, back to my apartments.com experience, right? You don't search for apartments that often. I showed you how to do like a cohort analysis and retention and all that kind of stuff. And if you're really focused on a 10x better experience, even for low frequency, you can still do that analysis. It just takes forever because like for Airbnb, who is one of my clients, the average frequency of purchase is once a year. So they actually did do the analysis on did the person come back 12 months later? Unfortunately for Airbnb, that analysis was like very high, which is why they built a great business. But Airbnb had a situation where they had built a product that was cheaper and better than a hotel, meaning it was in a cooler location on town, right? So it's just hard for most products to get that level of superiority over the current solutions in the market. So if you're doing something more like apartments.com, which is an optimization, then basically you're not so much looking for retentive metrics. You're looking for, did my variation of a transaction or a key action occur? And do I get some signal over the perceived quality of that interaction? So in the case of Airbnb, what do we look at before we see a second transaction? Did they rate the stay 5 stars? That's one of the, the key metrics, right? Apartments.com, right? It's like, how many leads did they file? How many of those were followed up on? How many of them get scheduled? We may not even know all the downstream information of what got booked, but we try to get that as often as possible. So when you think about product market fit as a concept, right? Like a lot of people will try to overcomplicate it, but really what product market fit is satisfaction that leads to sustainable growth. Satisfaction is normally going to be measured by retention. For low frequency products, it's not. You're going to get some other satisfaction signal. It could be a star rating. It could be they clicked the buy button for a $10,000 used car, whatever. That's the signal. And maybe it's a pair of the two. You get both the quantitative metric, the buy, as well as the qualitative metric, the star rating. And then you trust that if those are higher, it will lead to more organic people coming back. But the reality is for low frequency products, retention is really hard. So instead, you try to do one of a few things. You try to own where that user, you try to own real estate where that user is going to be when they need that thing again. So for apartments, it's Google. Like we need to rank #1 when people search for apartments. And fortunately for apartments.com, we did, right? And that's the primary way we get people back. It's not because they come back organically. Wishes that would happen, but it's not. They go back to Google, right? So that's really common, but it's not always Google, right? It could be Reddit. It could be basically any network bigger than you where your customers hang out, right? Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. Or you try to build a non-transactional product that keeps engagement with the brand in between transactions. Zillow is the classic example of this with this estimate. Everyone's checking out the price of their home and the price of the home of their neighbors, even when they're not in the market to buy a home themselves. But when they are in the market to buy the home themselves, you bet your ass they're checking Zillow, right? Because Zillow remains top of mind, right? Then there's the insurance play. If something's low frequency, but it's really high importance when you need it and you're not sure when you need it, you can get people to keep that app on your device, to keep that product top of mind so that when they need it, they know immediately it's there for them. Hotel Tonight did a good job of this for last minute hotel stays. There's products like LifeLock, et cetera, right? And then obviously we all hope to be like Airbnb or Uber, where we're 10x, better and cheaper. Obviously we love to build products like that, but those are 1 in a million.
The next question is anchored around, I think we spoke a lot about the metrics and how we identify them, how we use them in various contexts. Oftentimes you see some of the design anti-patterns, and that's where I think your experience fits in perfectly, where you've led both product and design teams. And oftentimes while optimizing for aha moments or habit metrics, you may get into a pattern of introducing some anti-design patterns like too many notifications,
Oh yeah.
FOMO messaging type of things. How do you really like avoid that from a product lens as a product leader, right? So they may move metrics positively in the short run. Like what is the counterbalance or the counter metric that you're looking for in trying to offset these kinds of messaging or this kind of UI development?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to pretend I'm innocent in this discussion, right? Like, I am literally the person that thousands of Redditors complain about because of over optimizing Google image search at my time at Pinterest. So I've done some shady shit. But what you're trying to think about is, the key metric for all of our businesses in some form or fashion is the total number of active users over any period of time, right? And as we like segment our OKRs for different teams and stuff, we can forget that they all need to cascade to the total number of active users. And if you're doing things to piss people off, and it gets you that short-term, thing that hits your OKR, but it's going to make it impossible to grow 6 months from now, those are like really empty calories from a growth perspective. So I think what we did at Pinterest and certainly at Eventbrite is we tried to optimize really hard on metrics that were long-term correlated to success and not really gameable. And we made a ton of mistakes along the way, and we just kept optimizing to get it closer and closer, right? So to take some of this onboarding work we did, right? Like, one of the experiments we did is we basically forced someone to save something. And that's like, cool, first saves went up a ton, and then, no one saved in the second week, right? Because they didn't really internalize why they were saving. They didn't save something they actually liked. So they weren't getting to the real aha moment. We were getting to the gamed aha moment because the aha moment and the aha metric are just correlated. They're not perfectly aligned, right? So if you game it, you may not actually be really hitting the aha moment. So we've definitely had issues like that. And then we reacted to like, okay, it's really about teaching them, but they've got to click the button. It's really got to be something they want to save because they like it, all of that kind of stuff. So I think, as managers, it's important that we're helping set goals that aren't like gamed. The example that frustrates me a ton, right, is like when you get a message from someone on LinkedIn and it won't put the message in the email. You got to click on the email to go to LinkedIn to open the message, which is by all accounts a worse user experience. But some growth PM's metric is the MAUs from that email. So he's like, I don't give a fuck what the users feel like. What's going to get me promoted is if my MAU number goes up. That's bad management. That's bad long-term product thinking, right? So to go back to your notifications example, in the short run, sending more notifications or sending more emails is always better. But we ran a long-term holdout at Pinterest. And if we get unsubscribes or worst case app deletions from sending too many notifications, there's no way to reach those users again. Well, there is. You have to pay for it, right? You have to buy ads, which we didn't make any money. So like, that's not a great option. And, we were able to show that, via a long-term holdout, that there's a Goldilocks zone of the right amount of emails and notifications. It's different per user. And if you stay in that range, you maximize the level of engagement. If you go too aggressively, you'll get more engagement short-term. And then the increase in chance of an unsubscribe or an app deletion go up dramatically. And in the long run, you're getting less, engagement, right? So sometimes you have to explain that, to your boss, right? You have to get the commitment to run the long-term holdout. And sometimes you're going to lose that battle, right? And it's just like, the CEO said, do it, we're going to do it. But a lot of that stuff looks good in the short term. It looks really bad in the midterm. And, you got to apply your common sense to that. It's amazing how like OKRs can get people to stop using their brain sometimes. And it's just really frustrating.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a deep topic and something that, as product thinkers, we often dwell on. So really good to get your thoughts on that as well. The one question that I had around like, in terms of thinking about complexity at a large organization with various features that are already built out. And it's very easy to go in and sort of think about like, how do we segment users, and if we are launching new products, how do we launch them selectively to newer segments? I assume that there is like, it's more of an organizational and a cultural problem to do that at a mature, evolved organization where some of these products are deeply ingrained into the product already. And like there are various teams and ownership structures
Yep.
that you have to work with to ensure that new users and they're like safeguarded essentially over time. What are some of the tips, or like what can you share about your experience in doing this? I think you touched upon your experience at Eventbrite where you had more than 100 features. So how can somebody on the like as a product manager sort of deal with this complexity? How can they convince their peers and counterparts and leaders at the organization to do something like this?
Yeah. So, one of my first couple of weeks in joining Eventbrite, one of the principal engineers came to me and he was like, look, man, this feature is so annoying. Here's all the complexity it creates. These certain music clients use it. I want to get rid of it. And I'm like, cool. Well, like you made it very clear that the cost to maintain is higher than the cost of retaining those particular customers. No brainer. And I'm like, dude, I'm gonna take care of this for you. I'm gonna get this cleared, with the sales team, with the customer success team, et cetera. We'll do a timeline, whatever. And he's like, yeah, I've heard that before. And I'm like, no, I'm fucking serious. And we just did it. And then he's like, I can't believe this actually like happened. And it led to one of the PMs on my team building a spreadsheet of the cost to maintain and the amount of usage of all the features we had built, and if there was a clear owner inside the company of it. And we found a lot of high cost to maintain, low volume of usage products. We made that a list to sunset. We talked to, the sales team, the support team, and in pretty much every case, it wasn't a big deal to actually like sunset that feature. We didn't like lose customers, all that stuff. But there was this, in a more sales-led company at the previous to me joining, this fear that like, oh, sales is not going to let us do this, so I'm not even going to bring it up, right? And actually just like bringing it up and saying like, hey, like here's why this doesn't make sense for the business anymore. Like we'll give them time to figure out a new way to do the feature, to find a workaround, but like we need to sunset this. Every time it was doable. But you just need to explain the case and be willing to like go have a few hard conversations, or to schedule some time with the incoming product leader, right? And we deleted dozens of features in my first year. And it made it way easier to ship new things that actually were strategic to us, that actually did help retain customers, that did help acquire, new customers, things like that. So like you got to be reasonable about where you're at in the organization and what's possible, right? You're not necessarily going to be able to pull all of that kind of stuff off when I'm coming in and I run the entire product team and the entire design team and all that stuff. You may not be at that level yet, which means you may not be able to attack every idea you're seeing, but within the scope of what you have, yeah, how do you delete the stuff that's not strategic? How do you make a business case to go talk to your manager or to, engineering leader, whatever, about some of these others that you're seeing your own responsibility over? And you'd be surprised how much of the time that you can actually push that through, and it makes a difference. We had an example at Pinterest where that save button used to say pin it, which was like a brand moment, right? It was like our version of tweet. And it actually said pin it in other languages. So if you were signing up in Brazil or whatever, it didn't make any sense. Like we saw it in the research. Brand team was like, no, we got to keep it. Like it's our brand moment. Like you can't change that. So we just had a new PM like go in and change it. 15% improvement in activation rate. Like go run the experiment, like ask for forgiveness. Like they're not going to fire you, especially when it has a massive impact on the growth of the company. So sometimes people can pervert their role at the company, right? Like the goal of like brand positioning is to like help make it clear what the promise of what the product could do is. And if the, brand positioning is preventing people from understanding that, it's not doing its job. And sometimes you just got to use a simple experiment to show that.
Awesome. I think that was a ton of wisdom packed into an hour full of conversation. So thank you for taking the time and walking our community through your great presentation, and then also taking the time to answer all of the questions that they had.
Yeah, thanks for having me.